There we go. Hey all, we're in September already. Isn't that crazy? Welcome to our public steering meeting. On steering, we have me, Brenda, Paul, Ron, Alex. Is April here? Is Michael here? I don't see them.
I don't see it yet.
Okay, so hopefully they're just running late, so we can get started on the agenda.
Thought I saw Michael in there.
Oh yeah, I was saying I
Michael,
wasn't seeing. I don't see April yet, but
I'm very happy to wait like a few minutes if April's running late. That would be fine with me.
She said yesterday she's on vacation, so
9:37. I think she's running late, but there are a lot of people on the call, so I think she'd be okay if we started.
Cool.
All right, I'm hearing we're okay to get started. The first item in the agenda doc is actually April, Alex, Ron, perspective on proposal. So
Yeah, so I'll kick us off, and then we can have some discussion around that. Brenda, Paul, can you at least confirm that you can hear me okay? I don't want to. My CPU is just spiked.
Coming through loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let me kick us off. So I think it's obvious from our being a little bit quiet, reserved, taking a step back, that we have some reservations about the proposal as it currently stands. And so as we were thinking about this, what we wanted to start with is to articulate and try to bring some clarity in what is it specifically about the proposal that doesn't match what we think is right for Knative. And so I wanted to give a little bit of background and then jump into some of the details. So first, where we're coming from is that we value very highly the stable core that Knative has today, and that's because we have now thousands of customers that rely on it every day, and so we've built products on top of Knative, thousands of customers. We value that stable core. At the same time, we see a lot of value in the innovation on top of that core, and we want to continue empowering the community to drive that. So that's kind of the balance that we're trying to find, and figure out how to kind of have that stability while maintaining all of the innovation and getting more out of it for everybody. So so we want to bring to everybody today something for everybody to consider. I wouldn't call it a formal proposal, but some alternatives for us all to consider. And I want to give a couple of thoughts on that to start with. So we want, obviously, I want to reiterate, we want to set up the project for success. I think it is, just looking at the number of people on this call, it clearly has our passion, your passion. We all want it to succeed, and it has been successful. And we want to empower the TOC actually to drive it, to drive that success. The additional capabilities, more, adding more on top of Knative. So we think that steering, so we want TOC to drive that. We think that steering actually has a useful, though small, role to play in that path forward. And we want to enable everybody to innovate on top of Knative. So let me talk about what I mean by that how do we empower other committees, and what do we think that small contribution from steering should be. So our alternative is seeking to focus the responsibility, accountability, the powers of steering, and ensure that the community is empowered to carry the project forward. in an open way that allows contributions and for people to earn agency within the project. So we think that the steering committee should really only focus on 3 areas. Advising the trademark owner on trademark administration, handling code of conduct issues, and then lastly, reviewing and approving the scope for Knative Core. And for everything else, we believe that steering should delegate all of those responsibilities, everything else in there, into subcommittees like the TOC. We should discuss and figure out how many committees there should be, what each of their responsibilities should be, how they're elected by the community and the contributors to the project. I'm not putting forth a very specific proposal yet because I want us to first discuss the thoughts that I've laid out here. But that's the main structure that I wanted to put forth for discussion today. So that was a bit of a mouthful. I want to take I want to take a little pause, get some feedback, thoughts, and discuss that higher level structure before we get into the details, if that's good with everybody.
Yeah, I have a sort of a question. So it sounds like a counter proposal or an alternative proposal, focusing on the scope and authorities of the steering committee, which is a topic, but I would argue that it's amongst many topics that are in the air at the moment, and that what we're trying to get through at the moment is the particular PR, which has a particular thrust in terms of changing the structure of representation from being company oriented to individual. I think all of these questions of and I've been responsible for creating rabbit holes and pushing people down it and laughing as they fell. But I think at the moment it would be useful overall to get through the immediate issue in front, which is the pull request in front of us. Part of it, Ron, is that there's a lot of history for the folks that are here that goes beyond sort of designing the ideal structure from first principles and more the historical experience of frustrations and tensions and emotional feeling. And what we're trying to do here is get through those first before we can talk about reforming other things. Does that make sense?
I understand your point of view. I think that what I'm trying to express is what are the parts of the proposal that we can't that we're unable to accept. And so I think that there are a couple things here. There's history that, for example, personally I don't have. So I don't want to pretend that I have it when I don't. So that's number one. Number two, I think that there are a couple ways forward, and which is one of the reasons I didn't put an alternate pull request up there. I think there's a possibility, I don't want to commit to anything yet, but there's a possibility that we adjust the current PR to something that we can accept, and so we can discuss that. I don't know that we necessarily, so, and I'm being genuine here with, I don't, you brought up something at the very beginning of your comment about some previous interactions. I humbly wasn't part of them, and that's not my style. So sorry, I'm just trying to actually bring. Yeah, I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to share what are the specifics that if we address them will help us move forward and complete the conversation. I'm trying to figure out how we can amend things in a proper way. We don't have. I'm not saying we have to start from scratch.
Ron,
so I don't know if I'm answering your comment. Yeah, sorry, Paul.
I hate to butt in. I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly, Ron, when you said, yeah. It's been a mouthful. I was just taking some notes real quick. And in characteristic fashion for me, I started taking notes after you started talking, so I'm not sure if I caught everything. But here's what I caught is that the tension that, or tension is not the right word, the balance that and I assume that you're speaking for Google rather than personally when you say we.
Correct.
The balance you're all interested in, like having the scales weigh out evenly, is around stability of the core and like how do we facilitate further innovation in the project. And I also heard a clear statement that like there's a recognition it's important to the community too. And the steering focus areas that you see broadly are trademark. My notes aren't grammatical. Okay, so let me translate them back into real language. Yeah. Is advising the holder of the mark on issues related to that, code of conduct issues, and future or present, as the case may be, questions about the project scope. Is that right?
Yeah, I want to be specific about that third part because I think there's an opportunity for fine-tuning that to make it so that to find a good path forward, which is it's reviewing and approving the Knative core scope. I think we need to, part of how you, in any project, this is not specific to Knative, part of how we get and encourage more innovation is fewer restrictions and more empowering of subcommittees as we, over time. And over time, starting immediately. I'm not saying we slowly relax things. I'm saying like starting today, there should be an ability to drive more building on top of that Knative core with less input from the steering committee. It's that core that that I want to make sure the steering committee reviews and approves. Do you see what I mean? So it's not the whole project; it's the project core.
Yeah, Ron. So first off, thanks for bringing forward this proposal and reflecting your ideas. I think this is a very healthy discussion. What I was, as you went through the items, what I was thinking is like, where is the biggest delta between the proposal that you just described and what we have today? Do you think it is this aspect around this responsibility for the core versus something bigger, or how would you characterize the key delta?
I think that the first two items that I mentioned are not significantly different from the current proposal. I think that the third, which is...
Sorry, just for clarity, the contrast being asked for is from the state as it is today versus what we're saying, not from the PR versus what it is today.
Correct. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I'm happy to have you answered. I just wanted to emphasize that I think Michael's question is about identify where we are to where we're going.
Got it. So I think the key distinction is I believe the steering committee today, and correct me if I'm wrong, has other responsibilities around marketing and all sorts of other stuff like that, and also has authority over all scope. And that's the part where I don't know that we need that, because I think it will slow us all down. And so when we look at what do we think is good for Knative, that difference is the core versus everything. That's the biggest difference that I'm looking at, Michael. Alex, I don't know if you have a different perspective on it or a better clarifying one.
No, I feel that's pretty accurate. The goal here is to constrain what steering is responsible for to the bare minimum it needs to do, so that the project can drive itself and the TOC can drive the direction for the project. I think there's been a lot of discussion about whether under the current PR you even need a steering committee, because it seems like the steering committee is made redundant. And so the goal here is to articulate what is the value that steering brings to the project from Google's perspective, and make that really crisp and clear, and then let the project have the life driven by the community as intended by everyone else.
How is the
could I just
defined? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to act that we have a couple hands up. So maybe we can clear the hands, and then Ron, I think you were going to go into more detail, and maybe Michael and Brenda, we can come back after the hands.
No, I wasn't. I was actually going to do the same thing you were going to do, which I noticed Vile had his hand up first, I think. So.
Yay. So I just want to understand a little bit more clearly the distinction between or what we think of as the core, like what all encompasses in the core. When we say core, are we talking about like the pillars, like say serving and eventing? Are we talking about the API shapes, or are we talking about like I can certainly sympathize with everybody's desire to go ahead and take a stability on APIs. We have other people. You're not alone in building products. So, right. But I want to understand a little bit better on sort of kind of what is it exactly what is core, and what are the kinds of things that happen there, and sort of kind of how does that relate to steering? So, for example, if a eventing working group goes off the deep end and decides to do X, Y, and Z, that is sort of kind of pushed all the way down in the working group. So I'm just trying to kind of get a little bit of clarity on that.
Yeah, Vile, just one quick comment, because I don't want to hog all the time here, but there are lots of people on this call who are building products. I'm trying to make sure that my perspective and my point of view is based on how do I do the best thing for my customers based on my products. And so I'm trying to make sure that my points of view are not my personal point of view, but rather what I believe I need to do in the interest of those thousands of customers. That's all I was saying. I know that there are lots of people building products, and they are trying to do the same. So I wasn't trying to imply nobody else is building products. I hope I didn't say that, because that wasn't the intent.
But those people don't get to have a route to controlling the definition of core. Only you and us do.
Sorry, that broke up on my end.
Sorry, you were saying that lots of other people other than Google are building products, but you also seem to suggest that they shouldn't get the same say in what core is.
So I don't see it that way. The way I view it is that TOC has the dominant say about how the product evolves, and TOC and steering have equal veto power over keeping things out of core. So let's say there's some new idea, whatever it is, we want to add teapots to K8. And so we start a teapot working group, and they start building teapots, and they're lovely, and they have flower patterns and so on. At some point, that comes across TOC's desk, and they say, oh, these are lovely teapots, but they don't belong in core. That's done. Steering doesn't have the power to force teapots into the project. But let's say TOC does approve the teapots and steering does not, then steering has equal ability to keep that out of scope. So the goal here is to ensure that the community is driven primarily by TOC or other subcommittees, as we might in some future date think are necessary, but enable steering to be able to control the final definition of what's in scope.
I have to ask the obvious question. Why is that okay for everyone else, but not for Google? Right? Like all these other people, you're saying it's fine because they have the veto via the TOC. Why isn't that enough for you if it's enough for them?
I don't think I understand the question, so maybe you'll have to frame it a different way.
So I think you were saying that it's fine for steering to have a veto because other community members have their veto via TOC. But why is that answer sufficient for other people, if that's an answer? Why isn't that answer sufficient for the steering committee members? So in the teapot analogy, to make it very clear, someone wants to add teapots. Let's say Google wants to add teapots. And your answer would be, well, the TOC members, the representation of non-Google people is on the TOC, so the TOC can veto it. If the community wants to do it, though, why does Google need to be able to veto it via the steering committee? Why can't they veto it via the TOC, which is what you're asking everyone else to do if they want to veto something?
Well, I think fundamentally because at the moment Google owns the marks. And so what we define to be in scope directly affects what the definition is of the trademark.
I'm asking less a question about how you can do this, and more a question of why it's right to do it.
I didn't mean that to be a how answer.
Well, I mean, it seemed to be that you were saying that Google gets the extra power because they own the trademark. And I'm asking, okay, that's how they have the extra power. Why should they have the extra power?
I was trying to say something very similar, but to my ears different, which is Google needs the extra power because they own the trademark. Not Google gets the extra power because they own the trademark, which is very subtly different, I feel.
Can I just recognize we got a couple of hands up in the chat? One of them is mine, because I think there's a question I have that touches this, but I think someone, Evan, you were before me.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, one of the powers that wasn't in Ron's list was governance, or setting the rules of the road for the project. You know, how people get on steering and TOC and so forth. That seems like it's important, and I want to make sure that was, you know, that's now 4 items for your steering committee. But I think there was a healthy discussion yesterday about what other things we'd like steering to do. So I think there may be a few more things than just a very narrow trademark and keep the lights on.
Actually, so in the interest of brainstorming, Evan, so in the spirit of brainstorming, I think that governance rules, aside from changing what those 3 components of the steering committee, I think could also be defined by a different, we could have a governance committee, and it could define outside of core, you know, 3-tier, 4-tier different layers, and what does it take to go to move between tiers, and all of that governance responsibility, I think, doesn't have to be in the steering committee. It can go to another committee. I don't want, you know, given our community, I don't know how many.
Could that committee define who's allowed to be, or the process for getting on steering?
No, I mean, otherwise it would redefine everything and it would become right. So I'm saying that other than the specifics of that, which we should leave in its current form, everything, all other aspects of governance, we don't need to put in steering. So yes, I get your point, which is, well, if you move all governance to something else, you've actually moved the steering committee overall. So I'm not trying to suggest that.
Jacques, I think that you had your hand up in the chat, but I wasn't sure if it was the second hand or the first.
I mean, I got 2 hands. I can make lame jokes about it. Thank you. Again, I think this is an important discussion. I sense that there is a lot of concern from Google about the sort of the orbit, you know, the broad authorities that steering committee has at the moment, and a desire to sort of sort out the heads of power, so to speak. And I think that is an important question. But I also want to drag us back to the thing that brought us here in the first place a couple of weeks ago, which was the discussion of changing the electoral process. Essentially, what is the franchise for steering committee? And I think that those are related. There is a nexus through the same document and that it has a purpose. But also I think a lot of the feeling is that a lot of folks really do want to move to an elected model and that we want to sort of like get that bedded down first. So an analogy I thought of yesterday, because we you know, and I'll blame you for this, Jules. Jules was waxing rhapsodic about having product managers because he has gone through the same process of being blogged that I did, which is working with pivots. And it's sort of like, and I have a prop for this, you know, this happened, except it didn't happen very well because of the background painting. The light bulb went on. And I thought that if we were looking at this as like a story and a backlog with the various discussions that I've had, I and other engineers would be sitting there pointing it at like 10,000 points. We'd be saying to the product manager, you got to break this down and you got to put them in order. And so if we were building this as a backlog, I would say the pull request we have in front of us, which is mostly about the franchise and about the electoral system, would go at the top of the backlog. But we'd also start adding items explicitly saying we need to discuss the heads of authority for steering. We need to discuss conflicts of power between TOC and steering committee. We need to discuss how vendor representation might work or what it would work. There's a whole bunch of issues that are sort of like outstanding. And I think that the reason it's sort of like all jammed is perhaps people feel incorrectly that there's this one opportunity to change things when that's not true at all. I just think that the first thing we should do is sort out the PR, which was about representation, and then work through the items.
So I had my hand up after Jacques, and the question that I had is, and I maybe heard it kind of touched on, but and I had the perception, Ron, that you were maybe going to go into detail about this, but I might be wrong. Is in terms of it's not clear if you're proposing a different model for how steering is composed, or what the status of that, like in terms of your thoughts, is. Could you maybe clarify a little bit?
Yeah, thinking. I'm trying to figure out how I want to articulate this. I think that, well, I'm trying to take Jacques' feedback along the lines of, okay, we'll put everything in terms of the current PR. So, yeah, I guess the point I'm raising is that we think we would want to change the rules for how elections into the steering committee happen, and what is the composition of the steering committee to be much more similar to what it looks like today. And so we can do that as an edit on the PR as an amendment to the PR, or start that from a fresh one and get into the backlog with a different one. And maybe I misunderstood Jacques' point of view. So apologies if I'm not approaching it correctly. But so do you see what I'm trying to understand how you'd like to proceed with that, given Jacques' comment?
Yeah, and I appreciate the difficulty of thinking on your feet, yeah. So what I heard is maybe that it's in an indeterminate state, like maybe a position isn't fully formed, but no, there's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe I'll try to return to Michael's question, which I thought was clarifying.
Yeah.
The thrust of what we're saying here is that we can, I think, empower subcommittees to drive the project in the community-driven way that's in the spirit of the existing PR, without substantially changing the current composition of steering, but rather by constraining its powers to a very specific set of powers. And so that is the thrust of what we're saying here. So it's not really about changing the way steering is elected. It's really about changing what steering is responsible for in an effort to make everyone comfortable with the fact that the project is truly an open project where anybody can earn agency, anybody can drive innovation because it's all community driven.
But if it sounds like certain things are moving...
very well put, Alex.
So it sounds like if things are moving out of steering scope, though, there are certain things that the community does not have agency over. Right? Is that correct? The original articulation of steering when we were discussing some stuff related to TOC from Tomas was that steering existed as a backstop for effectively, the sort of decision-making authority for the community, right? And so if steering relinquishes scope, right, the question is, who does that authority fall to, and how does the community have a voice over those aspects of the project that are no longer in scope for steering?
Could you give a specific example? I think it might be easier to answer your question with a specific example.
Sure. So we've had requests for things like vendor neutral training material. Ron mentioned marketing, right? There's how the infrastructure for the project is financed and run. There's a whole bunch of things, right? How do we pay for Slack? How do we pay for stuff, right? I mean, there's a whole category of how do we pay for it, right? Which is sort of unanswered.
So go ahead, Alex. No, I've been talking too much, so go ahead.
So trying to pick just one of those examples, I think you said marketing, or another example. I think of the kind of thing that we are talking about being in scope for steering is sort of community management or driving community events or whatever. There's, in my mind, some of those things could be delegated directly to the TOC, or if we feel like the skill set that we want to do a particular thing isn't really a good match for the skills of people who put themselves forward for the TOC, we create a new subcommittee called like the marketing committee. Have the community pick the remit for that committee and define it, and like that committee then goes off and does that thing. And that community would be presumably in a very similar model to how we do TOC, elected by the community, choosing people who have a track record of caring and commitment to the project and are going to put the time in to make their subcommittee a success, whether that's about marketing or about some other topic.
So just
I was just going to also add that, like, I don't know of any. The only project I know that has that is Kubernetes, and we are not at Kubernetes level yet. But I think when we get to that level, we can obviously use their expertise in that area. And that's one of those things that, like, traditionally people kind of do on their own versus the open source project figuring out exactly what, the marketing plan for the open source project will be. So I kind of wonder, like, how much we're actually trying to scenario out things that may not actually be a thing. That's my
so you're probably right, April. But to get back to Matt's set of examples, I think what I'm about to say is the same as Alex's, but I would imagine there would be an operations committee that would be elected by the community. And they would be responsible for Scott's KNCon, and because I don't think we need a KNCon committee, and a marketing committee.
Conferences.
So I don't think. I mean, it's up to us to figure out how many different committees, but there is such a thing as overkill, and so I want to make sure that we're and this is my personal opinion. I don't think we want so many committees where everyone's part of it. Matt, but I'm trying to answer your question, which is I think there would be an ops committee that is not nominated by steering, but rather elected by the community, so that we can serve the community as best for the examples that you gave. So hopefully that helps.
Well, so I think the clarifying question I have is, if steering is shedding that scope, what gives it the authority to delegate that scope, right? It is the backstop today. It can create those committees today to effectively shed that scope in the same way that TOC exists as a delegated body for technical decision making, right? So I think really what you're suggesting is no change from today, because steering exists as that backstop and can create those committees today. But what you're saying is that we haven't grown to the size of Kubernetes to justify the creation of those things, if I'm understanding correctly, right?
I think Ron was actually saying something slightly different, which was that he was suggesting that running a community vote would be the backstop rather than having steering do it.
For what, Evan?
For deciding to set up like a marketing committee and determining who's on it. You suggested using a community vote for that rather than having steering
decide,
yeah.
Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, I think we would want to put up a PR for a suggested committee and what its responsibilities are and how many members and how they're elected, and then the community would have a vote for it. If we want to, I actually am also okay with if we want that to be a TOC thing, that's fine, but I don't think the people who are on the TOC want that, want to deal with that. So I'm trying to, sorry, go ahead, Paul. I apologize.
Sorry, no, it's just the speed of light. I just noticed Brenda had her hand up.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Scott Nichols had his hand up first, and then I'll go. Go, Scotty.
So I think the major point that we're trying to talk about here is TOC was changed to make sure that there was no single vendor majority on that board, and the community wants the same for steering. And it sounds a lot like what Ron is saying is the proposal sounds good, except we can't undo the majority for Google. And I think that sounds like what the backlash is here in this meeting. Like, this is what people are reacting to.
What I was going to say is, just to bring us all back on why we're here, is the open issue that we have in our community repo around clarifying formula for steering composition. I don't think we've addressed this issue, and I think that's kind of what I want us to focus on, because, like, I'll be very upfront, I don't want to be on steering forever. It's been a while. I've been here as part of the beginning of the project. I just want to understand, like, what that formula looks like, or if you have any thoughts around that.
I mean, one quick reaction to what you said before we go to whoever had their hand up next. Like, I just got here, so I'm good. No, I'm just making a joke, Brenda. I don't know who had their hand up next.
It's a good joke, Ron. And I was gonna echo. I was gonna make a point similar to what I think Brenda was trying to make, which is in the spectrum of, like, if we change nothing about the way that steering is composed in terms of, like, the people being one extreme and the other being completely elected. Here's something that I think I want to ensure that I surface as something important, which is and what I heard is that the Google position at present is keep the steering composition more the way it is, but I I'm wondering if I like maybe misheard that, because I think we would want a diversity of like vendors to, sorry, it's tough to find the words in a just-in-time manner.
Yeah.
So here's what I am wondering is, darn it, I thought I had the words and then I lost them. But let me put it this way: is I think that if we don't change the model for who is on steering in some way, then we haven't really clarified exactly how steering is composed, because right now we're sort of in this, we've been in a bootstrap phase where we kind of like, we picked people and said, this vendor gets a seat. So I don't want to jump to conclusions about specifics that maybe, you know, in your all's minds, but I just wonder, are we talking about not changing that at all? Are we talking about slightly changing it? I think maybe getting more details will help folks understand exactly what's proposed or what's being thought about.
Yeah. So both you and I are like trying to think on our feet, think through all the other questions in the stack. So I'm more than happy to spend a little time detailing that out with you offline for our next meeting. I know that you said you want all meetings to be public, so we can continue. And maybe bring a little bit more details and brainstorm this with everybody. I'm also happy, Paul, to go with you, and whether it be one or two other people or something like that, to come up with what are the specifics, so that as we detail them, we have someone to bounce ideas off of that aren't just Alex and April, so that we can do some QA for what we are putting forth, so that we're a little bit more efficient. I'm open to that, just so that you and I and Alex and Brenda are not all trying to articulate everything on our feet, and everybody gets to watch and eat popcorn, as entertaining as it might be.
Can you give us like a sketch though? Like even without details, right? Just like the flavor of what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Just to complete my thought, quick, is one thing that I want to just like also recognize, at least for me, is this is a large amount of food for thought. Like this is a lot of content. I feel like I'm probably going to have to go back and listen to this a couple times to just make sure that I got everything. I don't know about anybody else, and I appreciate the content, but it's a lot to think about. So tough to think on your feet, tough to puzzle over just in time. But I will definitely like need a beat of time after this to digest it all.
Good thing Labor Day's coming up, huh? I'm joking. I hope you're not doing that on Labor Day.
I already blocked off Labor Day to think about Knative, so that's convenient.
One way to think about this through is that if you think about the three responsibilities we're talking about for steering, you could try to figure out, you know, what value add do different approaches have for making those decisions, right? So advising the trademark owner on trademark administration, what composition a steering committee will make that advising actually have teeth and impact and effect, and make it not just a lame duck process that can't actually make things happen. What is the right group of people within the project to focus on code of conduct issues? I would put forward the point of view that in today's zeitgeist, that needs to be the steering committee, just because of where we're at with some world events going on around racism and inclusion and things like that. These are important things the leadership of the project should be invested in. In a future world where this is more under control, I could imagine deciding to delegate that to a subcommittee. But in today's world, I feel that the leadership of the project should own code of conduct. And for controlling scope of what's in the brand, in my mind, that's very clearly tied back to the trademark ownership. And it's important that it not be possible to modify what's included in the mark without the trademark owner being on board. So if you think about these three responsibilities through the lens of what group of people will actually be able to execute those responsibilities, that should inform how the committee is composed. Not meaning to take away at all from the idea that TOC can drive innovation within the project, can set up subgroups, that the community can vote on when it's the right time to have a marketing committee or when it's the right time to instantiate some other structure to drive some element of the project. At the end of the day, what we want here is an open project where everybody is empowered to get agency and to drive things that are important to them, and try to define what steering is responsible for in the narrowest possible terms and empower steering so that steering actually has a role to play that is worthwhile for the success of the project.
Is Google aware of the risks of keeping this hardship position on the community, for example, on partners forking the project and taking it somewhere else based on this standpoint?
So, I mean, the beauty of open source is that it's, you know, anyone can fork an open source project at any time. And at the end of the day, you know, as the CNCF would put it, you know, the fork is the ultimate vote of no confidence in the leadership of the project. And, you know, that's why it's open. That's why you make it open source, is so that people can fork it. And so I don't think anyone can embark on creating a new open source project and giving, you know, their hard work to the world without being aware of them.
So what I'm hearing is that the current signal from the community is kind of reassuring for Google that this is a scenario that is less likely to happen.
I didn't say that. I mean, what I said is that it's an open source project and people are free to fork at any time. That's just the reality of being open source. That's the promise of open source. That's the goodness of it.
Yeah, but I would expect if there is a signal that everybody's hearing and only Google is not responding, that it is actually hearing that signal, then there is either a problem in the communication of that signal or a willing to keep going all the way until that happens, and maybe that's an alternative plan for Google.
I'm really not trying to be dense, but maybe you could say what you're saying in a more direct way. Is what you're trying to say that Google is trying to encourage the community to fork?
No, I'm just saying that I see a strong signal from the community that the direction Google is trying to push the project towards is not, I would say, being well received. And that means in my mind that if this continues, this signal will lead to a project fork eventually. So I'm just wondering, Google being well respected in the open source history, it's either saying, no, this will not happen, or there's a problem in this signal reaching Google. So which of these? Like, is it a problem with the communication, like with the signal itself, or is it a problem with how the community is so worried because, yeah, who's misrepresenting the signal? Who's misreading the signal?
I think there may be just a mismatch in point of view. So, for example, I see in the chat, Jules, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Jules says that it cannot and can never be an open project if the trademark holder must be happy with everything and the trademark holder is a single vendor. I guess at the moment I don't see that point of view. I totally think the project can be open within those constraints. And so you know, the TOC clearly has veto power, and so that doesn't mean the trademark holder can force the TOC to do something. Steering has veto power, and then that enables steering to make sure that marks are, you know, are easy to influence and drive. Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't feel like I've answered your question. I've done my best, but I don't feel like I have. I'd be happy to engage like one-on-one or something, because I feel like I have not really understood your point of view, and I sincerely want to understand it. So I'm not trying to stonewall you, but I don't feel like I really answered you.
I don't think it's a tricky point of view. I really don't think it's a tricky point of view. Sure, TOC has veto, but you, I think, if I've understood, are arguing that the trademark holder, which, let's be honest, we know what that trademark holder means here, saying the trademark holder has an extra veto not available to anyone else in the community. And that may be open source, but it's not an open community.
I just want to jump in and say, yes, but I still want to bring us back to the issue of representation. Like even if we decided that the powers of the steering committee, where we would delegate trademark decisions to a board that we spun, and every once in a while you just threw a dart and it said sue some random person in Azerbaijan, whatever. What's interesting to me right now is the representation question. I think that's a really important pressure valve for a lot of the negative emotion that's built up over the last couple of years, unfortunately. And what I hope Ron and Alex and other person with an A, could you all choose different names? April, I'm sorry, April. I'm bad at remembering people's names and faces and names and faces and names. What I'm hoping that you take with you today and sort of mull over is, I think people are open to discussing amendments to the charter, but I think what people are really keen on right now is representation. I think that's what we want to sort out first before anything else. And I think that's why there's so much sort of like emotional freight in it, because this has just been kicked down the road so many times, in so many ways, on so many side quests.
Is it okay, Ville, if I just reply to Jacques first? I know you have your hand up.
Of course.
Thank you, buddy. So I hear you, and part of what you're expressing, I can only say that I empathize and I can attempt to empathize, but I haven't been part of the community as long as you have, so I can't even begin to empathize with the frustrations that you're referring to over the last couple of years. And I do want to work towards clarity so we can get to that clarity and move on, so we can focus on features and work. So hope, you know, I think we have that in common, because I think that's what's behind some of this. And there are two aspects that I think impact that representation. One is the representation on the steering committee itself, and two, focusing the representation on that steering committee such that we have other opportunities for representation and agency outside of it. And so that's the perspective I'm trying to express, which is let's very finely define the steering committee. Then let's identify how do other committees get formed, and how is representation there, and then what are the details for representation in the steering committee. So hopefully that begins to address it, and I'm not trying to purposefully be vague. I'm trying to help us end the meeting on time. Am I understanding your perspective, Jacques? I'm trying to actually put it in my own words. That's all.
Basically, but I want Ville to have the last word.
Okay.
Oh dear, the pressure. Yeah, so I think basically the fundamental problem that we are struggling with is the fact that we are on one hand saying we want to go and encourage innovation and so forth, as long as that innovation is good for the community, and that's great. But then what I think we are trying to say is that because Google is the one single entity that can at any given point saying, nope, we don't want to use Alex's example, teapots. Then the problem is that there's always going to be a gatekeeper that is a single vendor, and that I think is really what is the fundamental problem, and why we want to go ahead and understand how do we change that to be community representation. Those are my words.
We are also over time.
We are.
I'm gonna have to jump for another community call, but.
I tell you what, I think maybe we should call it here, unless Ron or Alex or April, any of you would like to respond to Ville. Like I said, I am gonna need to devote some like brain CPU cycles to like processing everything, and I appreciate the input into these discussions from like from all my steering colleagues and the community. Yeah, I don't know if anybody wanted to respond to what Ville said.
I mean, personally, I do, but that will continue the conversation. So I think that will continue the conversation more than just a couple of minutes. So I know that would be helpful. I'm happy to talk offline. And I think there might be something we can do together, whether it's me, you, and Ville or something like that, to try to move for our next meeting so that we can present something a little bit more concrete. But if you don't want to, that's also okay. I'm just making a suggestion.
Okay. It sounds like we should call it here. And
yep.
Yeah, my brain is full. So thanks for the brain cargo, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. I felt like it was a good discussion.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, all.
See ya.
Thanks very much for attending.